What did American political participation look like during the age of Jackson? During the age of Jackson, which is 1829 to 1837, political participation in America grew as more white men were given the right to vote, regardless of property ownership. Political parties, especially the Democrat and Whigs, became more organized, and campaigns began to use rallies, speeches, and newspapers to reach voters. Jackson's vision of democracy focused on giving more power to ordinary people rather than just the wealthy elite. This period also saw strong loyalty to political parties and increased public involvement in politics. The main goal of these challenges was to make the political system more democratic and less controlled by the rich and powerful. Jackson aimed to empower regular citizens, changing the political system to better reflect the will of the people associated during these times.
What did Americans see in the life and character of Andrew Jackson that made him so popular? In what ways did he embody the prevailing mood of America during the 1820s and 1830s? Americans admired Andrew Jackson because he was seen as a self-made man who came from a poor background and became a war hero, especially after the Battle of New Orleans. His tough, straightforward style and his image as someone who fought for ordinary people made him relatable to many, particularly those on the frontier and in working-class communities. Jackson's strong stance against the elites and his support for expanding voting rights appealed to the desire for more political power among everyday citizens. His populist approach and connection to the American dream of opportunity made him a symbol of the nation's democratic hopes. Explanation: Jackson's popularity grew because he embodied the idea of success through hard work and persistence, which many Americans admired. He resonated with the public's desire to challenge the wealthy elite and create a full people-driven government.
Why were women and blacks left out of the political democracy? Was their exclusion from politics linked to their exclusion from the fruits of the market revolution? Women and black Americans were excluded from political democracy because of long-standing social and racial beliefs that saw them as inferior. Women were expected to focus on home and family with little thought given to their role in public life, while black Americans, especially in the South, were denied rights due to slavery and racist laws. Their exclusion from politics were closely tied to their lack of access to the economic opportunities of the black market revolution, which benefited mostly white men. Even as the economy grew and many gained wealth, women and black Americans were left out of the political and economic process. The main reason for their exclusion was the belief that women and black people were not suited to participate in politics or the economy. This kept them from benefiting from the changes of the time, reinforcing their lack of rights and different types of opportunities.
Why was property ownership so easily excluded as a voting requirement by the 1840s when it was vital to obtaining suffrage in the 18th century? By the 1840s, the requirement of property ownership to vote was seen as outdated because the country's economy was changing, with more people moving west and gaining land or working in new industries. As democracy expanded, more people believed that all white men, not just property owners, should be able to vote, reflecting a shift toward a more inclusive political system. Many states began to drop property requirements, following the Jacksonian idea that ordinary men should have a say in government. This change was also influenced by the increasing power of the common people and the desire to make politics more responsive to them. Explanation: the shift happened because of growing democratic ideals and changes in the economy. By removing property requirements, the political system moved closer to the belief in universal white male suffrage, which was a key part of Jackson's vision.
How did the nullification crisis illustrate the divide between North and the South? The nullification crisis of the early 1830s exposed the growing divide between the North and the South over federal power and economic interest. South Carolina, which relied on agriculture, opposed the Tariff of Abominations, arguing that the tax on important goods hurt their economy and that states should have the right to ignore unfair federal laws. In contrast, the North, which was becoming more industrial, supported the tariffs and the federal government's power to enforce them. The crisis showed how the North and the South had different economic interests, leading to conflict views on the role of the federal government. The nullification crisis highlighted the growing tension between the North and the South, and with the North favoring a strong federal government and the South defending states' rights. It was a clear sign of the sectional conflict that would eventually lead to the Civil War.
What was the impact of removal upon Native American communities in the 1830s? The forced removal of Native Americans in the 1830s had a devastating impact on their communities. The most tragic part of this was the Trail of Tears, where thousands were forced to leave their homelands and move to what is now Oklahoma, enduring severe hardship, illness, and death along the way. Many Native Americans died during the journey due to disease, hunger, and the harsh conditions they faced. This forced relocation not only caused immediate suffering, but also left a lasting trauma, breaking their ties to their land and disrupting their cultures. Explanation. The removal had both immediate and long-term effects, displacing Native Americans from their ancestral lands and communities. It was driven by the U.S. government's desire for more land for white settlers, showing little regard for the rights and lives of Native peoples.
What are some of the ways that Native Americans responded to removal policies? Native Americans responded to removal policies in different ways, including legal challenges and armed resistance. The Cherokee, for example, took their case to court and won a ruling in their favor, Worcestershire versus Georgia. But President Jackson ignored the decision and forced their relocation anyway. Some tribes fought back with armed resistance, leading to the Seminole Wars. Other tribes had less success in resisting and were eventually forced to leave their land. These responses show that Native Americans tried various methods to protect their land and rights, from going to court to fighting back with force. Despite their efforts, the goal was always to resist removal and preserve their communities in the face of a powerful U.S. government.
How did Americans use the ideas of liberty and freedom to justify Indian removal? Conversely, how did opponents of Indian removal use the ideas of liberty and freedom to advocate for Native rights? Supporters of Indian removal argued that expanding the United States was a natural right and that moving Native Americans to new lands would help them preserve their way of life, while also allowing for more economic growth and freedom for American settlers. They believed that spreading American civilization and liberty across the continent justified removing Native peoples from their ancestral lands. In contrast, those opposed to removal argued that it went against the true meaning of liberty by denying Native Americans their land, rights, and self-rule. They believed that the forced relocation violated the nation's core values of freedom and justice. Explanation. Supporters of Indian removal used the idea of liberty to justify expansion, while opponents argued that liberty should protect Native Americans from being displaced. This conflict highlighted how the ideals of freedom were applied differently depending on one's perspective and interests they engage in following along.
How did Jackson's battle with the Bank of the United States demonstrate an expansion of presidential power? Jackson's fight with the Bank of the United States showed an expansion of presidential power by directly confronting and attempting to shut down a major national institution, despite strong opposition from Congress and the bank's supporters. In 1832, Jackson vetoed the bank's recharter, arguing that it was unfair and unconstitutional, using his veto power in a bold new way. He then ordered the withdrawal of federal funds from the bank and moved them to state banks, taking control of the nation's finances. This conflict marked a shift in power, as Jackson used his authority to challenge both Congress and the financial system. Jackson's actions showed how a president could use executive power to challenge established institutions and push through major policy changes. His battle with the banks set a new example of how presidential power could be used to shape the nation's economy and politics.